All right, we're going to get right into chapter 2. So that afternoon after school, my friend Jeff Manning and I checked the gear we had hidden in our secret cave in the clay cliffs. 2 sturdy surf casting rods, the red bucket with fishing lures hanging by their hooks around the rim, my dad's old lantern, and in the far corner are sleeping bags, worn jackets, and rain gear. Do you think we should have an extra rod? I asked anxiously. If we catch a striper big enough to break one of these rods, we'll stop fishing and run to the contest headquarters to enter it, Jeff answered, grinning. We won't need another rod. I guess not, I replied quickly, anxious to change the subject. Didn't Jeff know it was bad luck to talk too much about catching a prize-winning fish? Better to concentrate on being prepared. Study the tides and the wind, check your knots, sharpen your hooks, keep your eyes and ears open. That's what Pop always said. And then you'd be ready if the big fish came along. I guess we're all set, Jeff said. Yeah. The wind was blowing from the northwest, which meant it was sweeping right in off the ocean, and the damp, salty spray whipped through the narrow entrance to the cave and right through the t-shirt I'd worn to school that morning. I was cold and hungry. I looked at my watch. Uh-oh, I was already late for dinner. Let's go, I said. I'm 5 minutes late. Mom's probably called the cops. We squeezed through the cave's entrance, walked down the steep face of the cliff, and headed along the beach to where we'd left our bikes. When we reached the narrow path through the dunes, we walked carefully to avoid the poison ivy that grew like crazy all over the island. Now that it was the end of October, the poison ivy had turned a deep reddish orange that seemed to warn, keep away. But during the summer, it was an innocent-looking green, and I couldn't help feeling a little sorry for the tourists who tramped right through it every year on their way to the beach. I'll meet you after school tomorrow, said Jeff, jumping onto his bike. Okay. We'll go right to my house, make some sandwiches and stuff, and we'll be fishing by 4 o'clock, Jeff said, excitedly. Then he asked, what are you going to tell your mother? It was a good question. The island-wide striped bass derby began the following day, Friday, at 6 o'clock in the morning, and lasted the entire weekend, ending at 6 o'clock Sunday evening. Jeff and I had to go to school, but we planned to bike to the beach as soon as possible to get our gear and start fishing at the rocky point below the cave. We were going to fish all night and every other minute of the weekend that we could. The only trouble was my mother. I was lucky she'd let me enter the derby at all, but she had absolutely forbidden me to fish at night. I'd reminded her of what she knew very well, that the best time for fishing for big stripers was at night in the dark. But I might as well have been talking to the stone jetty down at the harbor. You'll be home by dark, or you won't go fishing at all, she'd said. Here I was, almost 13 for cripe's sake, and she treated me like I was 2. I was thinking about saying I'll be spending the night with you, I answered. Well, you will be, said Jeff with a grin, except we're going to be spending it at the beach fishing. I tried to smile back. Yeah, but you know what she'll think, that I'm sleeping over at your house. Jeff whistled. It's kind of risky, he said. She might call my mom. And won't she figure I'll be fishing? Probably, but I can't think of anything else, can you? Just then, we saw a blue pickup coming down the road. Jeff's father at the wheel. He pulled up alongside us. You boys planning your winning strategy? He asked. We sure are, Mr. Manning, I said. What's it going to be? You fishing from shore or coming out with Betty and me to the Squeteague? We're going to try Devil's Bridge, Dad, said Jeff. Mr. Manning nodded. Good spot. Going to break your old man's record this year, is that it, Ben? He asked. I'd sure like to think there's a fish out there that's 66 pounds, I can tell you that. And if there is, I'd like to see Jack Daggett's son be the one to catch it. Me too, I said. Well, Betty and I'll be taking the boat and heading off to Norman's Island. You boys are welcome to come along. Thanks, Mr. Manning, I said. I guess we'll stick to our plan, Dad, said Jeff, but maybe we'll come out in the boat on Saturday, he said, looking at me questioningly. I shrugged. Maybe, I said. If Jeff wanted to go out in the boat with his parents, that was fine with me, but I didn't think I'd go. I had decided I was fishing in the same place and in the same way Pop had always fished for stripers. And that meant fishing off the shore, casting into the rocky waters of Devil's Bridge. Jeff told his father he'd be right home, and Mr. Manning turned onto the Lobsterville Beach Road. Jeff said, so you tell your mom you're coming to my house tomorrow night. What about Saturday? I don't know, I answered miserably. I'll worry about that later, I guess. Yeah, well, I'll see you tomorrow, said Jeff, following his father home. I went the other way, pedaling hard against the wind, which seemed to be getting stronger all the time. Good, I thought, this wind will get the water churning. Stripers liked it when the waves stirred up the bait fish. I was breathing hard by the time I reached my driveway. A shiny silver Cadillac was parked by the back door. Oh, brother, I muttered. Barry the bozo's here, just what I need. I walked into the dining room where Mom was already sitting at the dinner table. With her, in my father's chair, was Barry Lester. Mom let out a sigh of relief when she saw me. Oh, thank goodness you're safe, she said. Mom, I'm only a couple minutes late. That's long enough for me to imagine all sorts of terrible things, Benjamin Daggett. Where have you been? At the beach, I mumbled, slipping into my chair. The beach, she asked. What were you doing at the beach? Nothing, I said, just messing around with Jeff. We lost track of the time. I'm okay. Nothing happened to me. What could happen to me at the beach? My mother's face got a funny, crumply look, and too late, I realized what I'd said. Pop had died last September during Hurricane Lois. He had been offshore fishing for tuna when the storm came up too suddenly for him to get in. Bits of his boat and later his body had washed up on the shore of Cuttyhunk Island. Mom hadn't been near any beach since. She hadn't set foot down at the docks, hadn't gone near the water in a whole year. When Pop was alive, Mom went fishing with him all the time. When I was born, she just took me along. Pop used to say proudly that I'd been raised on salt spray, diesel fuel, and bilge water. Mom had helped Pop run the outriggers and pull out the nets, rig the rods for tuna and mackerel, rake for scallops, and set and pull lobster pots. And soon I was helping too. But the hurricane had changed all that. Hurricane Lois, just remembering that name made me feel mad and stunned, the way I'd felt when I heard what had happened to Pop. How could a storm with a sweet, stupid name like Lois take my father away? Now all Mom did was worry that something was going to happen to me, and it was driving me nuts. She was especially nervous these days because fall was hurricane season. If she had her way, I'd probably never go out of the house except to go to school, and I'd never go near the ocean, which was ridiculous if you lived on an island like Martha's Vineyard, and if, like me, you planned to be a fisherman. There was an awkward silence after my dumb question about the beach. Then, in a bright, fake-sounding voice, Mom asked, Aren't you going to say hello to Mr. Lester, Ben? Keeping my eyes on the plate, I muttered, Hi. That's enough of this Mr. Lester business, Kate, said Barry the bozo in the same kind of too jolly voice my mother was using. I'd like Ben to call me Barry. No need to be so formal. We're all friends here. He went on, tilting back in Pop's chair and rubbing his hands across his stomach, which hung loosely over his belt. Your mother tells me you've entered the Derby, Ben. It wasn't really a question, so I didn't answer. I just kept shoveling food into my mouth fast so that I could leave the table. After another awkward silence, my mother finally said, Ben? There was a warning in her voice. Yeah, I said, still without looking at Barry. Mom, could you pass the milk, please? Mom handed me the milk with a pleading look. I knew she wanted me to make nice, polite conversation with Barry Lester. Didn't she see how wrong he looked sitting there in Pop's chair, his soft, chubby, white hands clasped over his stomach? For a second, I saw Pop's hands, strong and brown and calloused, from a life spent at sea. Fishing was the best kind of work there was, Pop always said. Out fishing, a man could be free. Barry Lester sat in an office, renting cars to tourists, filling out papers with his soft white hands. How could Mom expect me to have anything to say to a man with hands like that? What kind of fish is it you're after? Asked Barry. The contest was called the Striped Bass Derby. What did he think I was after? Goldfish? Stripers, I answered. I expect you'll need some bait, he said. Perhaps after dinner we could go out and dig some earthworms. He looked proudly at my mother as if he'd just said something brilliant. Worms? Didn't this guy know anything? Mom jumped in quickly, saying, Earthworms really work better in freshwater, Barry. If you fish for stripers with bait, you usually use big eels. But Ben has plans to fish with plugs, I think. Isn't that right, Ben? I nodded. Plugs? Barry asked, looking confused. Lures, my mom explained Mom. They're made of metal or plastic. When you reel them in, they look like a bait fish swimming through the water. Ben, she said, turning to me, show Barry some of your bass lures. All of my lures were in the cage, ready for the next night's fishing, but I couldn't tell Mom that. I had to change the subject fast. My father was a great fisherman, I blurted. Oh, said Barry faintly. All of a sudden, I found myself talking a mile a minute. He holds the island record for striped bass. Everybody from around here knows about it. Barry Lester had probably never even been in Chick's tackle shop, which served as headquarters during the fishing derby, so I told him about the record board on the front wall of the store and how Pop's name was carved right on the top. Nobody else around here has come close to catching a fish that big, I finished proudly. There. That should let Barry Lester know that sitting in Pop's chair didn't mean he was even close to taking Pop's place. That ought to show Mom that even though she had forgotten Pop, I hadn't. But you're going to beat the record this weekend, is that right? Asked Barry, smiling at me eagerly. Right then, with Barry Lester grinning at me like a jack-o'-lantern, I wasn't sure what to say. My father's name had been up on that board since before I was born. Putting my name up there would be sort of like Barry sitting in Pop's chair. I shrugged, wishing I'd kept my mouth shut. I'd better get started on my homework, I mumbled. I got up from the table and began stacking plates. Mom said, Barry would like to take us out to dinner tomorrow night, Ben. Mom, I'll be fishing. Well, I thought that maybe afterward. I meant to ask you, I said, interrupting. Jeff wondered if I could spend the night. That way I'll be able to go out in the boat with him and his parents early Saturday morning. I kept my head down as I scraped the plates so that I didn't have to look at her face. It was the first big lie I had ever told her, and I felt bad about it. But it was her own fault, I reasoned. If she'd stop worrying so much and let me do things like other kids, I wouldn't have to lie. Oh, Mom said quietly, I guess that will be all right. I'll give Jeff's mother a call to make sure she doesn't mind. You don't have to, I said quickly. It's okay. I saw Mr. Manning this afternoon. Another lie. Well, not really. I had seen Jeff's father, but of course he hadn't said a word about my sleeping over. Feeling desperate to escape, I hurried to the kitchen with a stack of dishes, went straight to my room, and closed the door. And that's the end of chapter 2.